Oscar Wilde presents an unusual painting as well as some deep criticism of the British upper classes. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about magical paintings and debauchery. I am referring to The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which was published in 1890. For those who don't know, Oscar Wilde, I've talked about him on this channel before, so I don't need to go into great detail, but he was a British writer who lived in the 1800s, early 1900s. He was actually Irish. I should point that out, not British. People might get mad about that. But he wrote a lot about poetry, focusing on the romanticism of the time, and he also wrote a number of plays and the importance of being earnest, as well as many others. And then this is like the only book that he wrote, which got him in quite a bit of trouble, because as it turns out, he sued somebody because they insinuated that he was gay, and then it was found out, yes, indeed, he actually was gay. And so they then took him to trial for obscenity, and found out a lot about his personal life and all the various men that he was having sex with, and they pointed out this book of how it was kind of obscene, which, to be honest, I think it might be obscene for its time, but it's not very obscene, decades later. But that's probably beside the point. But he got really thrown through the mud in British society, and the result was he went to jail for obscenity, for indecency, for being gay, and that's what led to his deteriorating health, and he eventually died of meningitis. So a very unfortunate life there. But in his contemporary time, he was forgotten, but decades later, he was eventually rediscovered, and people regard him as a really good writer, which I am inclined to agree with. But we'll find out why in a few moments. I will end up spoiling this book because it's been out for quite a while, 100 plus years. So if you intend to read this, go out and do it, and then come back and, watch this video so that we can have a discussion. But without further ado, I'll do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Picture of Dorian Gray focuses, of course, on Dorian Gray. He's a rising sort of upper class and individual, very young at the start of the story, and at the beginning, the story focuses on Basil and Lord Henry. Basil is a painter, and he's talking to his friend Lord Henry, a really rotten individual who justifies anything and everything. But he talks about the painting which Lord Henry likes and his friendship with Dorian Gray. Basil indicates that he's somewhat attracted to Dorian without really saying too much about that, but he's kind of obsessed with him. And Lord Henry wants to meet this person, which Basil doesn't want to do because he knows that Dorian or Lord Henry is going to ruin him. And so they meet, and Lord Henry talks about aging and makes Dorian feel bad about a number of things. Dorian wishes that he could always remain young and the painting would grow older, which is indeed what happens. But despite all of their difficulties, Lord Henry and Dorian have quite an extensive friendship, which upsets Basil because he worries that Lord Henry is going to influence Dorian. And later, Dorian talks about a new relationship that's developing with a woman named Sybil. She's an actress, and he's quite in love with her. Lord Henry insists that this is just a fleeting romance, not meant to last. And later he comes and says he's engaged, so Basil and Lord Henry want to meet her. But unfortunately, when they go see her acting, she does Shakespeare. She does pretty poorly. It's really bad, and Dorian feels ashamed. When he confronts her about this, she says that she had not known true love until now, so her acting feels a bit wooden because that's not real love. But she's in love with Dorian and wants to marry him. However, like he says, like, no, I was only in love with you because of your acting. Your acting was your real beauty, and I just don't want to be around you. And so she's sad. He goes off. He looks at his painting again to feel better, but he finds that it's changed subtly, which he thinks is because of the way that he acted. And he also comes to understand that he's probably going to remain young for as long as the painting still exists. And then the next day, Dorian wants to apologize to her, but finds out from Lord Henry that she's killed herself. And he tells him not to worry about it, not to get involved in that whole thing. And Dorian just decides to move on, even though Basil says that's not the right thing to do. Lord Henry gives him a book which kind of changes him. It's a very debaucherous kind of book from France, as those books typically are. And Dorian develops a curiosity of life, becomes obsessed with the book, and lives pretty freely for the next 20 years. Oscar Wilde just sort of skips ahead and says that Dorian has come to be associated with rumor and debauchery, and there are just rumors about Dorian being a not very good person, and he might have even sold his soul to the devil to remain young, because he never really ages. Eventually he runs into Basil, who wants to talk to him before he goes off to Paris, and they have a conversation where Basil asks, like, is it true what I've heard about you, Dorian? I'm a little worried. And Dorian says, yeah, it is in fact true. And then he goes and shows Basil the painting, which has significantly aged and is now kind of bloody a little bit. Just doesn't look good. Basil is shocked by this, and Dorian responds by just killing Basil at that point, stabbing him dead. And then he blackmails one of his friends, Alan, to help. And it might be suggested that they were in a relationship or something like that. But Alan agrees to help. Since he's a scientist, like, he dissolves the body and then goes off, and presumably he kills himself at that point. That's what it says. So the guilt gets to him. And then Dorian goes off and disposes of the body, or of the clothing, to hide evidence that he was ever at Dorian's house. And to cope with all of this, Dorian goes to an opium den and tries to do some opium. There he's found by Sybil's brother, James Vane, who because somebody had called him Prince Charming, James believed this is Dorian and plans to kill him. But Dorian tricks him by saying, I can't be Dorian because I'm too young. This was 18 years ago, and do I look like I could be that young? James agrees with that, and when Dorian leaves, one of the prostitutes says that actually was Dorian because he made a deal with the devil or something, and so James plans on continuing to kill him. Later, Dorian shows up to a party, feels immensely guilty about things, and believes that he's seeing James everywhere. And then when the party goes off and does some hunting, they accidentally shoot a stranger. And Dorian later learns that this was James, and he died in the process because he snuck onto the estate to kill Dorian. At this point, Dorian realizes that he's kind of free from everything because James is dead. Dorian goes off to the countryside and comes back and tells Lord Henry about a woman that he's met and how he feels renewed about everything, how he didn't defile this woman, so he must be changed, and he feels good. Lord Henry insists that's not true, that Dorian is who he is, and he's probably just being vain or something, or wants to change, but he's not really going to. And Dorian insists that this is true, so he goes back to his home, checks the painting, and it's not actually changed at all. It's gotten worse because he realizes that it was all a vain effort, a hypocritical effort, that he didn't really be nice to this woman because he wanted to be nice. He did it because he wanted to change the painting. It was for personal reasons. He wanted to absolve himself of his previous sins. And so he just decides at this point to take out a knife and try to destroy the painting. His servants hear something, go check upstairs. They have to break in through the windows, and they find that the painting has reverted back to its original version. They never saw the changed painting, but it's reverted back to the same version, and instead there's a man hanging there now who is severely aged. And they have to check the rings, and it's eventually realized that that's actually the Dorian Gray. He's aged to his original version, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, boy howdy, is there quite a bit worth talking about here. This is a really solid story, but I should point out first that Oscar Wilde does begin with a prologue that is basically like, all art is useless. It's not worth interpreting art most of the time, and it's good for an author to be vague, because that means that they've if people come to multiple interpretations of your art, that means you've done good. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I'll talk more about that later, but him just saying that, I don't know if he agrees with that or not, but it's important to say that, just because I'm going to be interpreting his art, and he might have just laughed at me about that. He might be like, why are you trying to do that? But I still think art is meant to be interpreted, so I'm disagreeing with Oscar Wilde there. But I do think one of the things they might be talking about here is, what does the painting represent? Why, it's aging, Dorian is not. What's going on there? And I think the painting represents Dorian's sins. It represents his lost innocence. That's pretty much said through the story. I think it's easy to kind of interpret that, although it might be hard to really decipher at times. But again, as Dorian Gray engages in greater debauchery, breaking up with Sybil, refusing to apologize, fighting with sailors, getting James killed, or something like that, and killing Basil. The painting changes as well. The greater the debauchery, the greater the change. And so, he remains young, but the painting reflects the lost innocence. The painting reflects the sins that you cannot run away from. It reflects the murders that he's done. It reflects the people that he's hurt, and so much more. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. What the worm was to the corpse, his sins would be to the painted image on the canvas. They would mar its beauty and eat away its grace. They would defile it and make it shameful. And yet the thing would still live on. It would always be alive. And that's just an interesting quote, just because it gets at exactly what the painting is about. It reflects his sins. It lives on. The painting does not die. It continues to live for as long as Dorian is living. So Dorian gets to stay young, which would be a great benefit. It's what he wants at the beginning of the story. He says that, but he's always going to be tormented by the reminders of the painting. Even if what he does is he puts it in the attic and hides it away, he still knows that the painting exists and that it's doing that. And what's more is he's still young. Every day he looks in the mirror, he's going to see a young version of himself and know that he's only young because the painting is growing old. So it's a curse. You can never truly run away from your sins. It's reflected somewhere. It might not be within you. It might be expressed somewhere else, but you're still going to remember every horrible thing that you've done, because you cannot escape yourself. What's interesting is that at one point Wilde suggests, this could happen to anyone. He notes specifically that Satan, when he fell from heaven, Lucifer, he was a rebel. He rebelled against something. And I think what he's trying to get at is that we can all justify our actions up to a certain point and believe that we're doing right, or that something is justified. Our horrible actions are good in some way. Lord Henry's off providing justifications for all of his actions, and even some of Dorian's actions. Don't apologize to Sybil, that'll just lead to more trouble. And he might be right, or don't apologize about Sybil's death, specifically. He might be right that it might lead to more trouble, but it's still the good thing to do, and he's only justifying all of these bad actions. And then eventually you reach a point where you've sinned so much, you've done so many bad things, that you can't really justify it anymore. But that's not really something that happens instantaneously. It's always a slippery slope of more bad leading to more bad, leading to more bad, and before you know it, you've become quite a monster. So it's interesting because Dorian, or like Wilde, isn't saying that this is just limited to Dorian. It could happen to really anyone, especially those people with enough power, which he's starting to touch upon class there. So maybe that's something that might have upset the people reading this. Him saying, nobody's born evil. They have to work their way towards there. And even more, it's not his sins that truly kill him in the end. Like, Dorian can sin as much as he wants, do as much debauchery as he wants, and he's not punished for it. There's no higher power punishing him. It's only after he tries to get rid of those sins, hide the evidence, and kills himself, that he receives punishment. It's only through his own actions, which again, somewhat controversial, because many books, the wicked are punished, but Dorian's not punished specifically for being wicked. He's rewarded for being wicked, and then it's only after he decides to just kill himself that he receives any sort of punishment there. It's self-inflicted, rather than a higher power saying, no, this is actually bad. Oscar Wilde is also talking about the Victorian upper class. He's heavily critiquing the British society here, mostly highlighting how the wealthy are kind of getting away with murder. Like, Dorian kills his best friend, doesn't get any punishment for it. It's really easy to kind of hide your crimes during this time. And he even notes, even if I were to confess it to other people, they wouldn't believe me. Like Dorian even says to Lord Henry, what would you say if I tried to kill, Basil? And they say, oh, you wouldn't do that. You're not the kind of person who could do that, which even if he confesses, he's not really going to get punished. And I don't even think these people would necessarily hold Dorian accountable, because they might just make fun of Basil and say, oh, he was a bad painter, he had it coming, or something like that. And what's worse is, not necessarily what's worse, but Dorian, he behaves badly towards people, kind of strings people along, especially women. But Lord Henry justifies everything. He provides a moral justification, or even immoral justification. He seems kind of nihilistic at times, where he's like, the soul is the soul, and it doesn't really matter. We all are the way that we are, and that's fine, because this is how society is. And there's no reason in crying over spilt milk. There's no reason in trying to redeem yourself, Dorian, because that's just who you are, and that's perfectly fine. We're friends, and that's just how things are going to be. There's no sense in moralizing or getting puritanical about things, even though the upper classes are quite puritanical and are more than willing to enforce this puritanism on the lower classes. Lord Henry just excuses everything. And it's not like the other upper class members are much better. They turn their noses away, but they're not unwilling to hang out with Dorian. They're not willing to call him out. Like Alan, Dorian is willing to blackmail Alan, but Alan's probably not going to tell on Dorian, because that would be being a traitor to your own class. And if there's one thing that there exists in the British upper classes, as well as upper classes around the world, is solidarity against the lower classes. And again, as I said, they don't abide by the rules themselves, but they're more than willing to inflict rules on the lower classes and harm others. You especially saw that in Oscar Wilde's own life, when they did the obscenity trial and many other things towards him. And while he did have some pretty weird behavior towards young men in particular, Wilde was critiquing the puritanical society, and they chose to inflict that upon him. Because I highly doubt Oscar Wilde was the only person doing this. He's just the person who got caught. Because he decided to say something about it to avoid besmirching his reputation or anything like that. He probably should have just let it stuck and just kind of had it hang in the air, but who knows what that would have resulted in. Maybe this was a long time coming for Oscar Wilde for critiquing the British upper classes. And I think what's interesting is that this book was banned for a long period of time, and even dragged through the press, and the printer decided to stop printing it because of its bad reputation. And so I think there is some element of debauchery and some homosexuality in this book. It's not explicitly said, it's kind of insinuated without really fully ever said. You kind of have to read it between the lines, as Lucas told me from Strike the Sun MD. But I do think it's also banned because of this critique of the Victorian upper class, kind of pointing a mirror at these people and saying, look at how you are. Dorian is just like you. Also, given Oscar Wilde wasn't unwilling to say that he was also like Dorian, or wanted to be like Dorian in living free. But I think that's just an indicator that maybe he was aware of his position in society and whatnot. And he wasn't trying to hide from being upper class, which take that for what you will. But I do think people attacked this book because it kind of pointed a mirror at them and pointed out all the flaws and critiques of the upper class. And I'm sure Oscar Wilde's book wasn't the first one, but maybe it might have been like a particularly heinous sort of depiction of the upper classes here. Especially noting, these people are getting away with murder. These people, no one's holding them accountable, so you have to do that. And there's nothing the rich hate more than you calling attention to their crimes and saying, hey, poor people, you can't just let this stand or anything like that. Although I don't think Oscar Wilde was trying to instigate a revolution or anything like that in British society, but I'm sure the British upper class might have panicked and thought that was the case. So it might be banned for one reason, but it's clearly banned for multiple reasons there. Oscar Wilde is also touching upon art here. Specifically, he starts off with an epilogue or a prologue that's saying that all art is useless and that it's good to be as vague as possible and not make any clear points. And you shouldn't really try to interpret art because that's lazy or boring or something like that. And you see that in a story where, Dorian becomes obsessed with this book and uses it as a guiding point for his life and the debauchery that he wishes to engage in. And near the end of his life, he's like, oh, this is, this book was poisonous to me, Lord Henry, and I blame you for it. And Lord Henry refutes this and says, maybe you were always like that. You chose to, engage in this sort of life. It wasn't my actions, but rather your own. And that's fine. That's who you are. We're friends regardless, but this is still on you. And I kind of agree and also disagree with that. I do agree that maybe this was always who Dorian was. This was always going to be his behavior. It's just kind of ingrained. But I do think hanging around with Lord Henry, kind of influenced him. Like you see that at the beginning of the story where Lord Henry starts talking about how we all age and life will soon become meaningless and everything fades eventually. A very cynical way of viewing the world, and it kind of imprints itself on Dorian, given he has to be pride and vainful for that to work. But Lord Henry is not without blame here. Again, there might have been very real people who were like Lord Henry, and because of that, they might have saw themselves in this character and felt really ashamed and got angry about it. But I do think Oscar Wilde is trying to make a point about how if you rely on art too much as a guiding point in life, it's going to lead you astray, but also the people in your life might do so as well. But I do have to wonder, is Wilde serious when he says that art should be vague, that you shouldn't really try to interpret art, or that it's useless? Because I feel like that's a weird thing to say. He might be satirizing, making a satirical point, but I also think he's kind of being serious there. I'm going to have to read more of Oscar Wilde's work, in particular his plays, to kind of get a feel for if that's what his mindset is. Maybe also some essays that he wrote. It's just important to kind of address that, because when someone makes that kind of statement, then it kind of fundamentally changes how you interact with their work. There are other aspects of the story that I find interesting, including the good characterization. I think Dorian is a well-written character. He might be a stand-in for British society, but he's also, just well-written, and his debauchery it's fun to see his sort of descent, as well as Lord Henry's just assholery. He's a really bad person, and you really feel for Dorian for hanging around with this bad influence. I also think the ending is kind of iconic. For this book sat forgot about for years, and I feel like that's a mistake, because this ending is it's become a trope. The debaucherous character, has a painting in their attic, and when they try to destroy it, it kills them. It's like Faust. People frequently talk about Faust here, but whereas in Faust there was an actual devil character, here there is no devil. The devil is yourself. It's you. You made a deal with yourself to be debaucherous. Lord Henry can kind of be the satanic or the Lucifer-like character, but he's not fully that. Again, there is a deal to be devil, or a deal with the devil made here, but not fully. And I think that's an interesting sort of split from the Faustian kind of archetype there. And the because of that, like, the ending is just iconic. I think it's worth talking about that ending alone. Now, there are a few problems as well with this story. In particular, I think the debauchery is kind of sped through. Like, Oscar Wilde just goes through 20 years of Dorian's life without focusing on certain events. And that kind of undermines the story a little bit, because you need to see the debauchery to fully understand what kind of person Dorian is. And the very fact that he alluded to it kind of makes people angry. And if he had actually written it out, he might have gotten sent to prison sooner. So that's worth noting. But he also does show that, like, Dorian kills Basil. So I feel like he makes up for it a little bit, but I would have still preferred to have seen, or like, for him to have shown rather than tell us about the debauchery. And then there's also a lot of weird things discussed about women in this book. In particular, like, Lord Henry says a lot of things where, like, women are one way, men are another, and seems to have a very negative opinion about women. I don't know if that's how Oscar Wilde actually felt. Again, I would have to read more of his work, but he does frequently say this stuff that I wonder if it's not just him sort of satirizing people like Lord Henry, and it is more like just a critique of women in society at large. I don't really know. Again, that's something I'm going to have to look into. If you have a good understanding of Oscar Wilde's view on gender, let me know in the comments below. And then the last thing is, this is frequently described as gay literature, which it kind of is, and I can kind of see it, but I was led to believe that this was debaucherously gay. Like, I thought there'd be more here, especially given that this was, this was used in his obscenity trial. This was used against Oscar Wilde, and I don't think there's much justification. A lot of it is allusions to that. He's not fully saying it out loud. But that might have been very controversial for the time to even allude to such things, or at least to say it out loud, because I'm sure there were a lot of people who did it in secret. Oscar Wilde did it in secret for so long, and people knew about it, but they didn't know about it. And it's only when it became like a matter of public record that people bothered to bring him to trial at all. But I guess I'm comparing it to now, where, like, people make gay sex jokes all the time. Sabrina Carpenter is out there talking about her sex life while she's singing every single night. It seems less taboo, or it seems less extreme than it might have. So maybe I'm just enforcing, my own societal standards right now on this book, which doesn't seem all that extreme years later. But, maybe I had to have been in Victorian England at the time to fully understand the obscenity trial and the uproar over such a book. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Pretty solid book. Pretty good. A lot of awesome writing. I can't believe this was forgotten for so long, because it's really stellar. It's a very fascinating descent. It's very interesting in its critique of British society at the time. But I guess that that happens with books from time to time where they're forgotten. I believe that happened with Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God as well, where people critiqued it because it wasn't what they were hoping for at the time, but later people were like, wow, this is actually pretty good. So I'm glad Oscar Wilde is remembered fondly after his time, especially the way that he was treated by the British press and the courts and all of that. But yeah, if you have anything to say about my review here, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know. There's a link to the Discord in the description. Feel free to join if you want to if you want to talk more about books, movies, TV, that sort of thing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and debaucherous travels. Farewell.